start the recording now and then introduce the topic again. Um, and hopefully some people did bring some stories along other than the story that I linked to. And if not, I'll have to tell another story. But basically what we're trying to talk about now is reputation versus monetary types of tokens and how to manage incentives and how to create incentivizations. So one of the things that I think we've all been victim to in the industry is having this tokenization thing and really collapsing monetary tokens to tokens that measure things that aren't usually measured in money. And that might be voting power, and that might be something like, I don't know, some coins that measure doing good for other people, things that generally have been given to people for because they make you feel good rather than that you could transact in them. And I'm actually really, really curious about how Common Stack takes a look at this, because so much of the Common Stack, and maybe you can speak to this or not, but is about tokenizing all kinds of stuff that I'm a little bit worried about, frankly. I mean, do I really want to have a ranking of, how generous I am, or how honest I am, or how whatever it is, how much I contributed to society? I mean, in some ways I'm a little curious, and in some ways, do we want to gamify that behavior? And then some things are pretty obvious. We do need reputation for certain things, because in order to have understanding of who's an authority, or who's most likely to actually carry through with something, we do want to know people's reputations. So, but that's not so transactional. So so if anybody has stories, experiments they're working on, anything they want to bring up in this group to say, hey, listen, we're thinking about designing this. What do people think? This is the space. So other than just that general umbrella topic, there's no particular way we need to start this conversation. So yeah, I'm opening it up.
Cool.
Well, yes, I had a question, Grace, because you mentioned this of the kindergartens, but is there sort of a repository or like a list where all these kind of case studies that have been done in practice are like in overview somewhere available? Has anybody done that?
I'm not aware of it, but one of the, that was from Dan Ariely's work, and he's written a few volumes on that. And it's on irrationality, what he calls irrationality. He was injured at some point in his life, and it was a question, and he was burned all over his body, and there was a question about whether to take the bandages off fast or slow, and he became obsessed with this whole idea of the perception of what's better versus what actually is better. So it's kind of a gruesome story, but that's his life work of whether something perceived. And so, for example, he has a study in there about having people to do some origami. So he has people do some origami. I mean, it's really an authority, but he had people do origami, and they were supposed to get this, whatever it was they got, little porcupine or swan or whatever. And then at the end, they were given the option to either buy the one that they had done or buy one that was done properly for the same price. And of course, they bought the one that they'd done that was ugly and not done properly. And just how illogical we are and what we, and so I think his work is quite profound when we talk about incentivization. It was done way before tokenomics or anything like that. I mean, he's been working on this for 20 years or something. And so, and he's been working also he works with pension funds and places like that to try and help people make better monetary decisions, because we're very bad at making long-term decisions about our retirement, for example.
Well, I have something to say. When you spoke about him just obsessing over imagining the scenarios of, is this the right way to do something, or is that the right way to do it? Opposing approaches, and just that in itself becomes like this whole spiral. And I don't know, when I think about this question of tokenizing rewards, or not tokenizing, whatever, rewarding people either financially or with reputation or inclusion. It's so, those lines blur so much to me, because so much of what inclusion and acceptance in your society does is like buys you the ability to have a comfortable life and greater career opportunities and financial opportunities. As with financial reward, often buys you opportunities to have better like social inclusion and validation. And I feel like they're both just these two tools that are getting humans towards living like a safe, comfortable, and healthy life till their dying days. And so like, I don't know, it's hard for me to even think of them as super separate and like as a rule, you know, like I don't know if there is a rule that says like, oh, financial inclusion is like, or financial reward is worse or better than reputation reward, because you said that the kindergarten experiment took place in Israel, is that right?
That's correct.
Fairly wealthy country, right? And we know this we have this statistic in America, at least, where people's happiness is measured, and as far as like, can money buy happiness? And as far as like a United States cost of living goes, people who have like about a $70,000 salary yearly are set, and beyond that, more money does not make them more happy. But if they're below that, more money does make them more happy, because it actually buys them that like safety and health and stability in their lives. So I wonder if that experiment took place, you know, in an impoverished city, in the kindergarten schools there, I wonder like if it might have incentivized the parents differently.
What you're saying is really interesting, and I want to give some examples about that to kind of speak to what you said. And one of the things I think that we're all talking about is when you say that there's a number, and it might be 70,000, there's a number at which people are comfortable enough that money stops being a factor in their decision making. And I think that that's quite profound. And it's saying we as a society have been willing to have people live under that level. And maybe there's something to learn there about that. So I actually do see a direct conflict. Welcome, James. We're talking about reputation or status type currencies versus monetary currencies. I mean, it's also interesting that you said that having more money can buy you into better social circles, which is, oh, well, that's pretty judgmental about what a better social circle is. So I'm just going to use it's just a classic example of the sandwich or the cup of coffee or dinner or whatever. If you go, you know, if you ask somebody for a sandwich and they give you a sandwich, they're your friend. And if you pay them, they're a waitress. And actually, the social fabric will break down. If you tried to pay your mom for the sandwich, it would break down. It's a transactional relationship. And so, and again, down I really did some work with, if I ask you to change my tire because my car broke down and you help me out, and I give you, I happen to have like whatever it is, a bottle of wine, $10 bottle of wine in there, and I say, hey, listen, just take this gift. That's kind of cool. But if I gave you $10, but it really is a $100 job, that would be insulting. So that in fact, money does conflict with relationship. It's in fact the way that our monetary system is designed, and money could be designed differently, but money is designed to substitute for having a relationship with somebody in many transactions. So I think that there is a intrinsic conflict between having something that represents this person is trustworthy and this person is caring and this person is that, you know, a status thing, and saying, okay, here's somebody who's rich. But I do think we've collapsed them. we live in a society where our status is super connected to our money. And, I found myself in some of the relationships that I have with people really having to put that aside to think that this person is a worthwhile person just because they don't have money. Like, I've definitely found myself in that situation where I had to consciously think of somebody as a success in their life when I looked at their work, even though they had never made money at it because they worked in nonprofit or something like that. So, yeah, I mean, maybe what's also helpful is for us to think about specific use cases of behaviors that we would like to see in DAOs specifically, right? Because we're talking about distributed governance. And then what types of behaviors we want to encourage that we've been talking about incentivizing behaviors, but maybe there's other ways to do them. So some of the behaviors we've wanted to incentivize in some way have been collaboration, voting, expressing opposing opinions, bringing real facts instead of fake facts. So what would people say about any one or number of those things as far as how we've been trying to incentivize them, or how you would try to incentivize those types of behaviors? I mean, has anybody been in experiments where people have been trying to incentivize collaboration or trying to incentivize voting and found it either failed or succeeded?
Hi, I didn't introduce myself in the beginning. My name is Eugenio. Yeah, Grace, actually, I had different experiences in the last 10 years. And it's not easy to synthesize them, but I would say that that if you put technique in front of culture, you often get very bad results, and you often get not clear understanding, and you get a mismatch of expectations between different parties when you try to enable, let's say, value-driven collaboration in a sort of horizontal structure without a clear distribution of risk and investment that you have in a traditional corporate structure where there is an employee and an employed. You have investors, you have clear boundaries in that sense, and also I would say clear expectations. That there's a bit of a shadow, I think, in many collaborative systems, that people join because they're driven by some sort of, they're resonating with some sort of vibe and some sort of project topic. I'm thinking about pulling off a festival, or pulling off a co-working space, or pulling off a distributed network of people and so on. And it's pretty open, so people can actually join single projects, but there is lack of proper agile project management skills structurally in that system, and people end up to either overwork or pretend to work and then expect to be recognized. And so there's not even leveling system that define how power is granted, how value is counted and retrospectively acknowledged.
Can you give an example for us so that we can really
speak
about that example, and then maybe we could all talk about the specifics of how that worked and how it didn't work?
I can make you an example of different companies, I would call them, because at the end of the day, I'm not gonna make name, so just to clarify, but I have deep experience in three contexts where one was a more kind of an NGO, but still a company, and other two are like formal companies, and they're for-profit company. And in all of these three environments, there is a wide base of contributors, around 50, 60 people contributing. And all of them, they've shared a similar culture, like they shared some similar approach, but I think implementing radically different ways that might seem details, but actually that's, I think, what I think make successful one and less successful the other two.
I'm going to stop you again
Yeah.
because it's really vague the way that you're speaking.
Okay,
We
tell me
don't
what
actually
you.
know what behaviors people were trying to incentivize and what
Yeah, I
worked and
think.
what didn't work. So it might be we were trying to incentivize better quality on our production line. It might be
Yeah.
we were trying to incentivize people not to hide secrets from one another so they could co-work. So right now you're talking about a vague thing. So yeah, can we get?
Yeah, I try to be more clear. So
Yeah.
I think what they all tried to incentivize was participation across different domains without boxing in the functions or departments, like different stuff. So everyone was free, technically at least free in these systems, to join different streams of work. And but the way it is accounted. So for instance, we have a budget, okay? We have a project, right? And we want to launch product, an event, let's call it just a product. A traditional company hired people and pre-allocate budget and pre-allocate this budget and say, hey, I'm gonna give you €2,000 to develop this and that. And I'm gonna give these other people €3,000 to develop this and that. The problem with this is that, which is the problem of, I think, traditional systems, is that it doesn't really incentivize people to produce the most value they can. And you cannot really foresee what is the outcome. So if you tell me, hey, I want a software and I have €30,000 of budget, I can sell you enough hour to saturate that budget and to give you a minimum viable product, and maybe sell you also a couple of retro refactoring hours, like.
I still want to go back to your example. So
Yeah.
these are all separate examples, but let's just go specifically to the example that you gave and then what incentivization they were trying to do.
Yeah, so I
the
was framing
example
this
was the example was cross team collaboration and communication. And what incentive functions did they put in? Was there monetary incentive for that? Was there reputation incentive? What was the incentive?
Yeah, it's money, of course, and it's because it's work. There's work behind, and
no, but wait. No, it's not money because there's work behind. If I'm getting paid a salary for a company, this is what I'm pointing at, because this is what I'm starting to hear. And being specific, the company often says we want people to collaborate across silos, but they don't give you any extra money for it. You still get the same salary no matter what you do. There's no incentive structure. Now, if you got employee of the month for doing it, now there would be a reputation or status structure.
Yeah, so in our cases,
yeah,
the incentive is money, and it's money attached to the actual value that is driven, that is produced. So it's not pre-allocated money. So I was framing this difference in the context of, instead of a traditional system, that pre-allocated budget. And there is reputation, which is a function also of the value that has been produced. And this reputation, it's giving you increasingly decision power in the overall governance of the company. So it gives you a weight in terms of like voting.
And how did they measure those things? Like, how did they measure the value of the project that you improved? How did they measure the weight of your decision? Like, was that transparent? Did people know how that was going to get done?
Yeah, so work is defined based on the theory of constraints. So it uses a radically agile way of chunking down big work streams into definable bits of work that you can account. And teams, anybody can propose new items, and these items, if they are in the lines of the 6-month strategy, then they get accepted, and then they're free to develop, like to organize and to deliver value around it. And when this has been accomplished internally, there is a board of people that have a higher reputation that say, okay, this is good work. And then the people that were in that task, they vote each other anonymously, saying, let's say, okay, first of all, that task was, I think we actually worked for a total of like 2,000 euro, let's say. And we had to deliver a website, just to make a silly example. And I think Grace contributed 20%, and Ron contributed 30%, and Anya contributed the rest, and I contributed a little bit there. The average of our anonymous vote defined the pie, the percentage of that pie that we're going to share to each other. So this is called retrospective contribution value accounting. And this is like a way that all these 3 organizations are using it. The problem is that you adapt it too much and you're not strict on certain things. I saw by experience that it didn't work, and it causes actually very bad behaviors and very bad things.
So that's super, super interesting. And that's exactly like the kind of thing that really is a really great example. So what kind of behaviors ended up being encouraged that you noticed in that system? Because that's a purely financial incentive at this point that you're talking about. And there may be a reputational one that you also didn't yet describe, because you mentioned that, but wow, it's super, super great.
Yeah, it's reputation. It's just a smart way to allocating company budget, I think, and to really have people adhere and be active on tasks that they really feel relevant or they want to contribute, and not just saying, hey, this is your title, you got to deliver this. No, I'm going to work on the things that I feel relevant. And also I'm going to work because there is some money there. There's one layer, but the other layer is actually reputation over time that get accrued. And this reputation allows you to take other decisions.
And is that reputation directly correlated to the amount of money that you've got? Like people said you did 30% of that, you get more reputation than the person who did 20%, so that they're actually the same measure in some way?
No, it's discrete in a sense that after a certain threshold, you can ask to become member, which is like a higher level, is a discrete higher level that the system believe you to be enough conscious about what's going on to decide whether a task is relevant, whether a task is completed or not, and stuff like that. So it's not so continuous in that regards. But I think that 2 behaviors that I saw and that I think we should be aware if you're designing a system like that is that if you are too plastic on the meta design of this governance, so if you change the parameters and the rules too fast and too often, people tend to be discouraged to engage. And if you set a culture of not paying enough or not allocating enough budget on the overall part, people tend to, for instance, way of making money in those companies either by through customer projects or to governance tasks. And in the systems, in some of the 3 systems I told you, where there was little money for governance tasks, and by governance I mean anything that is not customer work, but it is actually sustaining the development of the company itself, there was either little incentives at times, because I mean you make much more money just to go with a customer and therefore being an account leader or project manager and so on. And I would say also sort of mercenary relationship with certain people that highlighted the different kind of incentives that founders, so people that also have a financial stake on the overall system, add, and these kind of freelancer contractors that were friends, they're like since a lot with us and so on, but they're not really, I mean, I'm concerned to spend all night to bring all our training and courses online because of coronavirus, and they're mean, they're not really concerned, because if the company dies, they also have other freelancing opportunity. They have other company. Whereas when it is my company, I don't care about the value accounting. I just care to sustain the survival of the company. So yeah, it's
taking agile learning concept.
That's really interesting. I mean, what you're basically saying is that monetary incentive doesn't represent very well the sustainability or long-term values that the company holds.
yeah.
Yeah.
I think if I would have to experiment deeper in that direction, I would save part of the shares that we allocated at the beginning, only around certain people that were there at the beginning, contributing either with work or financial capital. To like, I would save some of this to allocate it to like, I don't know, you work a lot in governance tasks, you don't only get the money for the governance tasks, but at the end of the year, you also get part of the shares. I don't know, like something like this would be like transitioning towards a more cooperative design. Yeah.
It's really, really interesting. I mean, you know, it's just a very interesting way of saying what you said also about certain types of tasks were considered more valuable than other types of tasks. And so you're also pointing out to this idea of there's like an anti-incentive to perform certain tasks, you know, and your time as an individual, right? My hour is my hour. And so then I'm incentivized to do the ones that are maybe less important or more important, and you don't know by this allocation of resources. Yeah. That's really cool. And are there any other specific examples that you would want to give of some of the negative implications of this system? So Erwin, Eugenio came up, he explained to us these organizations that they had certain tasks that people would do together, and those tasks were budgeted, and then at the end each person rated the other person anonymously at what percentage they should get paid, and then everybody got paid retroactively a percentage of this job. And he was saying that there was some negative behaviors that came out of this system, even though it seemed very fair. So can you cite some of those behaviors? Jed, man, I just explained what we were talking about. So, but yeah, give us some examples of some of the negative behaviors that you saw that were caused by having primarily a financial incentive in this case. Eugenio, you're muted. We want to hear your.
I thought you were trying to engage other people in the conversation.
Yeah, I was explaining to Erwin so he would know what we were talking about. And then yeah, go ahead.
I think, yeah, again, like there are things that I want to be more specific that this model do not incentivize you to do unless you have a long-term financial stake, which is, for instance, I don't know, doing the newsletter every 15 days. Like, you're not concerned, but then you realize that this is the one that gets us client. And so like these things are not really appealing, or even boring tasks. We need to do the GDPR war room because by the end of March last year, I remember, or 2 years ago, I don't ever remember, we need to have an opt-in with all our subscriptions. The contractors don't understand, and they don't care, and they don't want to get $200 to do something so boring that maybe takes 2 days to do, you know, but I do, right? And so this difference in care is something that you cannot, this is one thing. The other thing is to never put technology beyond culture, in the first place, because this is not about technology, it's about socio-technical systems. So it's first about the cultural desirability and the actual capabilities to work in certain ways. It's not about adopting a cool piece of tech, in my opinion. So that's the other thing. And if you focus on implementing only something that is technical and it doesn't come from a social poiesis of people having certain needs and designing their own technical systems, then it doesn't work. And that's what Spotify and Zappos and many other companies have proven, that you cannot just copy paste organizational protocols because they work in a certain place. You can get inspired for sure, but if you copy paste, you're going to go in a very bad direction.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think that what I would like to, I guess I want to ask everybody as an inquiry based on this particular situation. So here's a company that they want to encourage cross silo activity. What they did was create certain projects, only certain projects, where anybody from any department could apply. And those projects were financially incentivized, and the group of people who participated would rate each other about how much they got. So that's one way of incentive, and we've learned that didn't work. So if you were a company trying to encourage cross-silo communication, what would you do? I guess that would be the question. What kinds of incentives would be appropriate? Would that be reputation? Would that be status? What kinds of measures would be appropriate to do that? So yeah, I would love to hear people maybe contribute to this idea, which is something that many of us want to do in our organizations, and start talking about, okay, what would you do in order to incentivize that particular behavior?
Well, can I add something? Yeah, I think it can also matter, to what extent people are either aware of or accepting the way how the incentivization is happening. Because I have an example of the co-working space where Fernando and me are both sitting, and it's a system that is based on surplus. So the company rents out like rooms for meetings and stuff to companies, and then they have a lounge. And in the lounge, it's possible to sit with freelancers and people that work on their own computers. You have free coffee and tea and sort of basic things. And they use to have a lunch that is also free and sort of constructed from the surplus of the lunches that are being booked by the bigger companies. And the justification behind this offering things for free from the point of the company is the notion of social capital. So you come there with a certain package of knowledge that's potentially relevant to other people, and you are sort of required also when you sign up for it to be open to share with other people. But yeah, so the electronic version behind it is incentivized by if the algorithm, because you can like put knowledge tags, and if somebody asks a question, then it can be sent to your account, and you can help somebody out with who needs certain knowledge for a question. So you have like a sort of a system with how many questions you've answered to satisfaction, and how many times you've been coupled to certain people. But this is still sort of the electronic incentivization was separate from like the real world in incentivization, and that was like harder to do because yeah, especially when there were a lot of students, sort of people were just sort of getting their food, and then you're sitting behind their computer and sort of eating and being in their bubble, and that was not really sort of appreciated by the organization because it was seen as like missing the point of trying to create an atmosphere where people were sharing knowledge. So what they did was at some point you could only eat at this specific table. There was kind of like a rule, it was not appreciated to eat just behind your own computer and work on. And then at some point there were these kind of discussion cards to spark conversation were on the table. And at some point it was feeling so forced that people were actually less willing to kind of talk to each other and share ideas than when it was still entirely free and open. So the sort of trying too hard attempts to incentivize people to do it were counterproductive.
Wow, that is a fantastic story. I love that. Yeah, and what you said was really simple. Like the way that we incentivize people to just randomly talk across silos in real life is we give them lunch. And it's so simple, but you can't digitize it. Yeah, that's fabulous.
So also, one of the things that I researched for my master thesis is the relation between sort of spatial proximity and more like social and cognitive proximity. Like does, for example, that is a very common question also when it comes to placing certain disciplines or working groups together in universities and companies. Like if you put people in offices in the same hall and that then they share the same canteen, does it actually spark collaboration between these different teams? And well, sometimes it does, but also oftentimes not. Like sort of if you have a certain working group that is working together online with a working group that works on the same topic on the other side of the world, then the social interaction over distance with another working group working on the same topic is usually a lot closer than people with like a sort of an office, 3 offices next door. Then yeah, I have no idea what they're doing. They're just, you always see them, but still after like a year you never talk to them. So it's I also don't know the answer, but I think it's something that even beyond the idea of incentivization and tokenomics, this is an important question when it comes to incentivizing collaboration.
Yeah, no, I really like that because I actually did have lunch with some of my colleagues yesterday, and I work in a completely distributed organization, but I happened to be in another city, and there were 3 people who live near there, and we said, let's have lunch. And 2 or 3 things came out of that, which I can definitely say what they are, but nobody's keeping track. And if somebody were keeping track and we went to lunch, what you're saying is if we went to lunch with the idea that the more collaborations we came to agreement about, like that's the purpose of the lunch, that we were going to get more points, the lunch would have sucked. Yeah, it would have sucked. And also, actually, in this organization, they did try this virtual kind of lunchroom and virtual kind of catching up and checking in, and it didn't really work. So, yeah. So again, that's a great example. Yeah. Who else wants to contribute? Has examples? Has ideas of how to do this cross organization communication?
Well, I just wanted to say I can definitely identify with that. I think it's an illness of those of us that work in these spaces. You start realizing, you show up to hang out with a friend and it's like, oh, like, did you have an agenda for today? Like, what do you want to do? or, when you're actually going to see a friend later and you say, oh, well, I have a meeting. Well, actually, I don't have a meeting. I have a hangout. And we lose sight of that when we're like really like always quantifying. But I think it's because we're in the realm of like quantifying behavior, and there's value to that. But I try not to beat myself up too much about it. But sometimes I'm a little ashamed.
I want to hear more about that. Like, I really do want to hear more about how you guys at Common Stack are quantifying that kind of behavior, because that is part of what you're up to.
Yeah, so we have a system that we call praise with a capital P, where we dish praise to people in our chat channels for all sorts of things, whether it's a contribution of, some sort of brain power devoted to the Common Stack, being really awesome discussers in the channel, or tweeting things, or just in general, like improving the, the space. I know, Grace, you've been dished praise for hosting this call. This call isn't for the Common Stack or anything, but we see you adding this value to the space that we're trying to add value to as well. At the end of the month, we look at all the praise that was dished as a team of 4 of us, and we assign token amounts to the praise, and so we can kind of convert the praise into tokens totally qualitatively. And this is the piece of it that it's really not all quantitative, because I think a lot of people don't see that part of it that's going on. They just see praise in the channel, and then maybe they notice people are getting tokens. But the real thing that's going on between the 4 of us that are like the core of this project is that we get together and we have a huddle and we talk about the quality of these amazing contributions that people have offered to this space. And then they turn into tokens should people desire to claim them. A lot of people don't, a lot of people do. And but these tokens are non-transferable, so they don't have a direct monetary value. They're basically just to signify reputation in our system, and later on down the line, they'll allow you to buy in or to hatch commons once the later components of the common stack are built, the bonding curve, and later on down the line, a voting framework and a proposal framework. So they give people a door into something that could be seen as a financial opportunity, but it's very there's a lot of degrees of separation there. So I see them as much more reputational than financial.
Yeah.
And yeah, I don't know. What are the learnings that we've gained from it so far? I think it's definitely even already in tokenizing the reputational appreciation, I think it has for some people it motivates them, but for some people it definitely I think makes them a little hesitant, or it makes them feel like a number, even if they're not seeing a number attached to it. Even just calling it out in a systemic way feels like that. But it's hard because we don't have a physical in-person community. And if we did, the equivalent of this would just be a popularity contest, right? It's you just kind of know who in the community has the most social capital and whose voice gets heard. But one thing I like about it is that it develops different styles of leadership. And I went through a really awesome leadership training when I was a kid, where we talked about 8 different styles of leadership. And this is the first time that I really learned that that a leader is not just the person at the front of a room who's visible and is going hey, I'm the front man, and I'm going to tell you all about this topic, and listen to me, and I'm going to live stream, and that's not the only type of leadership. And there are note takers and timekeepers and conflict resolution people, and people who welcome people, and people who do backroom analysis and keep data. And there's one-to-one communication people rather than big projectors. And I think that this type of reputation reward allows us to highlight that behavior a lot more than an in-person community has. We talked in this call about so much value, unique value that in-person community building has, right? Our lunches and and all of that. But there's also some unique value that is delivered with this tokenized reputation, because I can reward and recognize somebody who is very quiet and shy, but still takes leadership in their own way. So yeah, that's something I've learned from it.
It's really interesting what you said. And so as somebody who's been dished praise, what came up for me was I liked, and people also can share what their experience might be. I liked when I got dished praise in public for everybody.
I'd be pretty
And then I
interested,
didn't
'cause I
like
know
that,
we're-
well, I do this every week and you're only going to dish me praise
we're pretty
maximum
close
once
to
a
time
month.
for today.
And
I'll
it
jump
felt like
to something
less
else. I'd be pretty
recognition than
interested.
I
I don't know what
wanted. And that the number would never be public, and I don't care about the number. I care about being recognized for my work and being appreciated. Somebody saying, hey, we appreciate that, actually felt more valuable to me personally. And then the other thing that you were saying is how varied it is and how awesome it's been to learn about the different ways contributed. And now, again, as somebody who got dish praised, I'm like, I want to see the newsletter. I want to see that discussion. I want to hear about all the other people. I want to know who they are. And that actually the way that you're dishing the praise is unpublic, and both because it's a number value, but boy, I sure would love to know who my community members are, because in that text chat, it's not very rich. So I feel like there's a next level of recognition, which isn't even a number, that you guys could add on there that would make people feel even more appreciated just by talking about what they were doing in some way. And you see that whenever you go, right? If you go to an event or something, there's always somebody gets up in the back and says, I want to, I really want to, acknowledge the people who cleaned the bathrooms for us, or whatever it is. And then you think, wow, yeah, those bathrooms were damn clean. Wow, there was always toilet paper. And it's so that being appreciated in a public way and a specific way for what you did might be more meaningful than a point.
Yeah, that's why we don't want it to feel like points directly, like it is primarily just thanks. And in the channel, the presence it has is just like, we're praising you for this. Like, we want to thank you.
Can you send me the link to the presence?
That's why there's no tokens or numbers, and so many of them don't even ever turn in.
I've got the one you sent in your email.
But we still want to have that moment of thank you be present. But it's interesting because what I think I hear from you is your brain still goes to the number, even if you don't know what the number is yet. Like when you see that message.
Actually, I said the exact opposite.
Okay, I misheard you then.
Yeah, what I said is that my brain goes to, I wish people knew what I was doing, and I wish what I was doing, and I wish people, or wish I knew what they were doing. So it's more like badges, if you have, this is the good citizen badge, and this is the good good bathroom cleaner badge, and this is the good news distributor badge, and this is the good, like those kinds of badges that you get like on Audible or something. Oh, you're a meditator badge, so that, and that you're level 1, level 2, level 3, like those kinds of badges would be more expressive for me and meaningful, while giving me a number, oh, you're level 3, but also not comparing me with this just one type of, there's one reputation or one type of badge. There's all these different badges you could go for, and they mean different things, and we have different contributors, and maybe all the contributors to media want to get together once a week.
That's a really interesting spin. I like that.
Awesome. Who has more stuff?
Okay.
Yeah, who has other stuff?
So I think for me,
all right, Jason raising his hand, using the raise hand function. I love it.
It's so easy. So I'm glad you mentioned badges. I'm sorry, I was having a bit of a laugh because I was visualizing, we had the conversation started with an example involving the incentives of picking up your kids on time. And so there was a bit of a visualization of a schoolyard, and then the example of giving each other the equivalent of gold stars that we have to wear around all the time in a real like office setting. It would just be so corny, so inauthentic and horrible. Like gold stars for everybody. Like you're a good person. I don't know. I don't know. Sorry, I was laughing about that, but I'm glad you mentioned badges because I think that has some use case. I'd envisioned non-fungible tokens as badges as opposed to generic placeholders or generic equivalencies between people that are completely customizable to the qualities of the individual. I was thinking as well that the non-fungible token could be, in some cases, the equivalent of like a safety credential that you need for a lot of professions. Like I was joking with somebody the other day because I'm from Canada, which is really extremely regulated. There's a regulator for everything in Canada, and that includes being a janitor. And that you don't just get to be a good washroom cleaner and now you're a professional janitor. There are safety standards and you need a certain minimum amount of equipment and all this stuff, right? And so my train of thought on this is that when a professional goes and does a job, they kind of put their credential on the line, as in they could lose their license to practice in that profession if they fail to, or in some way like catastrophically fail to do what they were hired to do. And I think that's an incentive that could work if those badges are kind of hard to earn, like about as hard to earn as a mainstream professional credential might be. I came across a digital version of this with pointer.org. It's the international network of fact checkers that Facebook has decided to start using. Yeah, so Facebook has decided that they suddenly give a shit about fake news. And they're going to do something about it. So they commissioned this international network of fact checkers, which is a journalism driven, not for profit, that issues peer-to-peer badges to people who qualify along their checklist. And they have a pretty elaborate checklist of you have to cite all your sources and prove that you're not partisan and prove that you have the capability of checking all angles and triangulating for truth and on and on and on, right? And it's all digital. Now they're not using any blockchain. Their directory of badges is just a database, completely centralized. But their network is somewhat decentralized. There are journalists from a whole long list of countries that give each other credentials to be part of this international network. Okay, that's it. Those are my ideas for now.
Yeah, I love the idea that you said about your reputation doesn't always go up. There could be things that you could do to deteriorate. It might not be taking away the credential, but it might be being on probation or showing a lower number or needing to, like if you get a certain number of points for driving, you have to take a safe driving course and one of the things that I was thinking about in one of the systems we were developing, because we were trying to think about a DAO, of course, and then and in the DAO, when I say something, if my reputation is next to what I say, then people know what level of authority I have on that particular idea. Oh, this is an expert, it's not an expert. And we were thinking about that even if you don't participate for 6 months or something, it kind of erodes. Your knowledge base is not as good because you don't have the newest knowledge, but it doesn't disappear. But so we were thinking about how do you create those kinds of reputation scales, and it could just be like a color that gets more blue or something, and dark blue is different than light blue, but so that it's not a number, but it is quantifiable how expert you are. and that it could deteriorate, or if you start saying false things after a while, it would go down, and that could happen for a number of circumstances. I mean, you know.
Yeah, because that's really the way it works in most industries. That for the most part, if you're, let's say, a professional, just pick any industry, it doesn't really matter what, but I was going to use medical because it's regulated almost everywhere. That if you're a practitioner in some medical field, that the expectation is something that approximates perfection. And then if you don't deliver on that, that your reputation goes down, that there's no gold stars for being, nice.
Yeah. Yeah. And if I stopped leading this call every week and somebody else led it and I came back next year, people are like, who's she? It could be, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, there's way more to this topic. I don't mean to oversimplify it or anything like that, but I think that that's a really powerful starting point in terms of decentralized organizations and what we do in terms of reputation and layers of trust. I mean, how can a vast network, let's say we're scaling here and we're into, several millions of participants, and there's no reasonable expectation that participants can really know each other. How can I navigate that and place trust in other participants? I think NFT badges that I know that they put in a lot of effort to earn, and that their entire profession is predicated on this qualification, that they would not want to lose that or have that diminished. It can serve as something like a decentralized human resources protocol.
Yeah. Awesome. Good stuff. So we're coming into that was an hour, and last half hour, I really like to try and give an opportunity to anybody who hasn't spoken to say something in this time. So Erwin, James, Aoud, and Ron, if you want to give examples or respond to anything that you've heard, this is the opportunity where we we try to get everybody to speak up. All right, James raised his hand. Go for it.
So I'm new to this call, and I really appreciate the work being done to make it happen. I had an example I wanted to share from ETH Denver, because we use both the non-fungible reputation and this XP token through DAOstack. And it was a really cool experiment because it was a big event and everyone was participating. It was part of signing up. They had you get on this app at the door, it was fully part of the experience. However, I had so many conversations with people about how it was weird and they didn't like XP. It didn't mean anything to them. And by the time it was being used in the vote for the overall winners, it had been demoted as only partially informing that process instead of being the fully, deterministic ideal solution that was promised, which was okay. And it was a result of the experiment that we should think about. But I just wanted to share that example of something that was tried and didn't go exactly as planned, maybe. And I think it was a learning experience for everyone there.
So can you say a little bit more about the XP? Was that like a reputation thing that gave you more voting rights? And then how did you accumulate more of this XP over the weekend? And what were the things that specifically people thought were not right about that accumulation, for example?
So my project was one of the sponsors, and it was distributed through sponsors and other volunteers, I'm assuming. But we had tasks that we set before the event, which were designated as a certain amount of XP. And we had special access to the faucets on our apps. And it was just like a mobile web app. And simulating the process of transactions from us to the hackers was the process. So they had to prove they did our tasks. So there's a variety of tasks, and the degree to which each sponsor promoted that and try to make it part of their hackathon experience was, highly variant. But that was kind of the distribution mechanism, was face to face. There was some like QR code integration too.
So it sounds to me a little bit like people felt like they were getting more voting power for being advertised to.
Yeah, so I was thinking about it as a failure of like the initial design, because I'd love to see, instead of the sponsors determining what they want built, the hackers deciding what they want to build, and then sponsors funding that in a sort of flip of the whole script. So it's not governed by the people funding it. However, that's a question for the business, I'm not familiar with how it operates, because it's not part of ETH Global. I think that's one of the most interesting experiments in decentralized governance is ETH Global. And I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in that experiment at ETH Denver, because it was really fun, and the overall hackathon experience was amazing. But I just wanted to mention that.
It's really interesting. Yeah, I mean, it is really interesting because I was at an ETH Global event this weekend, and it's kind of the same. The prizes are distributed by the actual sponsors, and I didn't even qualify for a prize because of the way that was done. So, but I don't feel bad about that. I'm like, they're giving the money out, they should say it, but different people might feel different. Cool. So, yeah, Ron had his hand up as well.
Hey, yeah, thanks. I'm also new to this call, so thanks for inviting us. And it's interesting to follow and hear ideas and stories that are related to what we are doing. And I wanted to share with you a incentive mechanism that we are planning to embed in our solution. So we have an assembly of all the participants in the Saga project, so that can take together decisions. And one of the main concerns and the things that we wanted to fight is the lack of participation, and the fact that only very few and often the ones that are interested parties come and do participating votes. And we did a two-layer, we are suggesting a two-layer solution. So the first layer is offering a voluntarily delegation. So you can come and participate if you like, but if you are a less interested party, just point out on the person that you trust to represent your interests. And when he votes, it takes your vote with you. This is both optional and can be changed ad hoc. So if I don't like the way that my default delegate is voting, I can change it. Or I can retake my vote and say, I don't agree with you on this specific issue. But then we are still left with people that are their lack of participation is such high that they don't even bother to appoint a default delegate. And here we wanted to combine financial incentives. And what we are saying that we are looking on such participants as visitors or tourists, and we just made them pay a very small transaction fee on all transactions they are doing as part of with our token, our currency. We can call it governance tax, although tax comes with bad feelings for most of us. But this is actually what it is. If you don't even bother to think about how you want the platform to be governed, you are a visitor and you are paying a fee in order to support the rest that are doing an active measures. So I wonder what people are thinking, and if you can see any how you called it in the beginning, Grace? It was
unintended consequences.
Exactly, unintended consequences for such an incentive mechanism.
I mean, I personally love I love that. Like, there's a recognition that as a citizen you should participate, and if you don't, you got to pay somebody else to participate. I mean, I always worry about delegated voting, generally speaking, because it becomes a popularity contest, and I believe you know, I believe this guy, and et cetera, and, you know, uh, yeah, and then people accumulate power based on their popularity. Boy, that person was very upset about being on our video. You know, people get popularity that isn't really necessarily they're an expert on things, and I think all of us have heads of state that we would say that about, that the popularity contest and delegating voting isn't working great. So I would worry that that doesn't scale well.
But don't you think that the fact that you can always retake the power and say, I don't trust him anymore in general, or in this particular vote is voting against my own interests, so I am changing my vote and not going with him, solves many of those problems?
I think it does solve many of those problems, and you would have to observe it. And I would worry about the scalability. It probably depends how many votes there are and how often I have to check my inbox to see that he's being cool about it.
Something that we are trying to.
Yeah. And then, I mean, we see it all the time, right? I think we've all seen people, there's the cognitive dissonance. Like, I voted him in, I've always voted for him, and here he is doing something I don't agree with, and you go to your friend and say, yeah, but look, he's still doing that thing that you don't agree with. It's against your interest. And they say, because it's an intellectual laziness. So you'll have to see. I mean, you're experimenting, but I think it is a good way of doing that. Anybody else have comments for Ron?
Yeah, I think that it's difficult to put weight behind democracy, to say how much weight does this decision-making process carry. Having a vehicle that allows the will of the people to be heard, the will of the individual to be heard, is what voting has always been and is supposed to be. I like the idea of having more touch points on that, with less weight on each touch point, rather than one big decision once every 4 years, where we invest trust in a person essentially for 4 years, and then there's no more touch points in between. I think that's pretty weak sauce. I think having more frequent input is much better, much richer, and each input doesn't need to have as much weight or permanence.
Definitely so.
Awesome. Cool. And great. Ehud hasn't spoken. Erwin said he couldn't get his voice to speak. So Ehud, do you want to speak?
I work with Ron, so Ron spoke for both of us.
Okay, cool. Yeah.
Actually,
I mean, I think
just one next to another.
Oh, okay. Cool. I thought it was ironic that Jason spoke about more touch points than every 4 years, given what's going on in your country. So
yeah, well, we are going to vote 4 times in 1 year, but that's other times problem.
I have a question for the group. Close your mic.
I think so.
Concerning your comment about the popularity contest, this is something that I have been worried about also here. And do you know of any mechanisms of mitigating the popularity contest in delegation voting?
I've heard of ideas, but I've never seen them done. So one idea is something like, rather than delegated voting, it's more like reputation-based voting. So actually knowing somebody has knowledge in that area. So there's actually an example in Ray Dalio's book, or in one of his talks, about where they had regular voting. So it's about investment decisions. And they had regular voting about what was going to happen, whether the Bundesbank was going to back the euro at some point, whatever it was something like that. And everybody who was an investment advisor gave their opinion about it. And then they looked at everybody's opinion, but they gave extra weight to those people who were European finance experts. And when they didn't weight the voting, it was kind of break even. But when they weighted the voting between the experts, the people, and an expert isn't somebody who has a degree. An expert is somebody who has a history. They know that that person bet in the past correctly, not just that looks like good on paper, but actually, and that's very simple, right? Investment is a very simple thing. Like, I know what somebody's investment track record is in a way that I can't know about many other more subjective areas. So, but when they did the weighted thing, it was really clear which direction to invest based on weighting people who had proven expertise, not some opinionated expertise. So that was a kind of way of comparing like the raw popularity, we can call it, to the weighted popularity. So you might be able to use something like that. And then the other way that that I've heard people talk about it is again having people have kind of avatars where you've got a reputation score in particular areas, and then based on that reputation score, maybe you have to get a threshold to even get elected at all. So if you haven't got a badge or a threshold, then you couldn't even get elected as a delegate in that particular area, something like that.
Interesting. Somebody raised their hand.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I think what is important, like as a sort of a mitigation, is to sort of separate different terrains of human activity. So, you know, when it comes to a popularity contest, I think what is usually undesirable about it is twofold. First of all, that sort of certain things that make you popular in some area of human existence have a weighting or like have like an influence on how seriously you are being taken in another area of human activity, even though this is not relevant. For example, if you are considered physically pretty and you're getting like appreciation for this, then it becomes like it increases your influence in having something to say on TV because your face is like nice to watch on TV, in comparison to somebody who does not have this beauty standard. This is like a sort of a very crude example, but and then secondly, if this sort of like aggregates to sort of like the whole of your worth, that this kind of quantified form of reputation in what form of other becomes synonymous with your entire sense of self-worth. And I think like those two things are the I think among the main sources of the undesirability of what you call like a popularity contest, something that is in the informal sphere, also a reality in the world that we're living in, also outside of the decentralized governance. So to kind of like have reputation only connected to a very specific topic, for example, when it comes to expertise that has bearing on a specific field of human activity, I think could mitigate like against it. But I don't know if somebody has like experience with it or thought about it.
Cool stuff. All right, we have about 9 minutes, so maybe if people just want to go around and say a quick round of what they're taking with them from this call. Yeah, just go ahead, anybody, what, you know, minute or less, what you're taking away from the call, what you got out of today's discussion.
Start.
And then pass it to the next person so we don't, yeah.
Okay, will do. I think that we sort of scratched the surface on a couple of topical ideas that this isn't a new field of inquiry by any stretch. People have been looking into this for a long time. It's difficult to a certain extent. I think that technology is less of a barrier than the culture that will adopt it. I'm surprised that we didn't touch on proof of personhood or proof of humanity, because one of the major opponents that we're actually up against in a digital space is automation, program instructions, and all the rest. But I think that maybe it just went unspoken that we assume there's a layer of proof of personhood somewhere in there. But other than that, very enjoyable conversation. Thank you all for good ideas and such, and we'll see you in other forums. And I'll pass it off to James, because I saw that you unmuted for a second, so I know you're ready.
Thanks. And I really want to just echo that appreciation for this call. It's really been delightful. And my takeaway is that every number is qualitative.
Pass it on.
I'll pass it to you, Grace.
Well, I guess for me, it was really good to have actual examples of things that people had tried. And maybe in some ways, nothing we heard was surprising, but it's good to see that there's actually use cases. And I think the other thing is, sort of as the person who organizes the call, I always, when I came in, I was like, who are all these people I don't know? I wonder how this is going to go. And I think this is, I guess, our fourth call. What's been consistent across the calls is the quality of the calls, the quality of the people, and the variety of the people. And I've been just really honored to have each and every one of you. And I just feel like these calls are really opening up conversation in a different way, and that it's attracting the right people, even though even though we're in the middle of Paris Blockchain Week, we're still has a really good quorum and momentum to it. So I'm really gratified that this is contributing to the community. So thanks, everybody. I have to pass it as well. I'm going to pass it to Lorelei. Can you give your summary? I know you said you're just listening, but maybe you can just give your 1-minute summary.
Yeah, I can check out. I really appreciated the note on culture, because my brain kept circling back to that in this call. It's like, we can try with the tools as long as we want, but if we still don't have a definition of an understanding, a collective understanding of what's right or wrong, or what might give someone better reputation in a community, then we're still at the bottom of that mountain. So yeah, I just really appreciated that in the last moments here, and just thank you for the call. And yeah, that's it for me. I hope to see you guys again and meet some of you in person.
So yeah, just one of you guys hasn't spoken, just pick it up.
Victor, do you want to check out?
Me? Yes. Well, I wanted to give some takeaway food for thought, like closing the call, because what I noticed, and it sort of sparked my interest, is that I think it was Jason who said it, but I noticed the use of the term a gold star, and I don't know if it's entirely derived from that, or like if it's been like for longer in the English language or in American culture, but the gold star, as far as I know, as like a metaphor of reputation, comes from the religious Christian children's story "You Are Special" from Max Lucado, and there's sort of wooden persons, that's just sort of a fairy tale, where there's like a village and the people are wood, and what they do is they live in a system where they stick gold stars and gray dots on each other. And this creates sort of like a hierarchy system in their society that is pictured as actually as a dystopia. And then the sort of like one of the main characters is yeah, just like covered with gray dots, you know, like feeling very bad about himself. And then he finds out about like another girl who has none, and it's because like she goes to the wood carver who lives on the hill, who signifies God then in the story. But it's what makes this interesting is also like sort of the cultural and maybe cultural religious background of how somebody perceives like the sort of the impact of a certain form of like reputation system, and sort of what it does to the psyche. And I think that this is sort of touching upon both the design of a reputation system, but also how people from certain cultures, maybe other cultures that are not shaped or like shaped by maybe an inherent aversion towards a credit system, see this very differently. But yeah, respond to the the existence of something, or like sort of the tokenization of what your reputation is in a certain system. Like in, for example, the system with money, it also has a very specific impact on what is appreciated, but it's then separated to some extent from other fields of human life. So yeah, like I see this as something that for me, I just don't have the answer.
Awesome. That was, I had never heard that history before, so that's really interesting. Great. Ehud?
Well, I joined kind of late in the conversation. I have a takeaway that there's a lot about DGov that I don't know. Our system has some decentralized governance components, but it also has centralized. We're kind of mixing it together. Today we shared our voting method we're using on the Telegram group, and we would love to learn. We're open to see if we have components that we can put in our system. And another takeaway is that I'm still worried about the contest that we talked about, and you mentioned. It's something that I feel deserves a lot of attention, because we see it all over our political systems, kind of taking over all of our lives in Israel and all around the world. And maybe that could be a subject for a future meeting.
Yeah, delegated voting and popularity contests. I think that I've been avoiding that because I think we shouldn't do delegated voting, and that's kind of my own stupid bias, but it's obviously a very interesting conversation. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much, everyone. It was a pleasure.
Thanks so much. And so we meet every week at this time. And if, yeah, I mean, so ping me if you want to be added to the list. And it's always posted on the dgov.foundation forum, all of the information and all of the recordings. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Thanks.
See you guys.